Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Jordan Christensen of The Draw, and today we're going to talk about Utah. We've got a deadline on March the 5th. Jordan, it was great to see you at the Western Hunting and Conservation Expo up in Salt Lake City. Great to see how active the booth was, and you constantly had people. Every time I went by there, you had people you were talking to and new members signing up, and I just want to congratulate you on the success of The Draw, and it's obvious that people are taking notice, and it was great to see your booth always full of people.
I appreciate that very much, Jay. It's rather humbling. You know, you have an idea and you put a name to it, and then you start pushing, and it's embarrassing how much I look forward to getting up to that Utah show every year. Like, I love it very much, and it was, again, humbling to have so much, traction there and get the chance to shake hands with so many people and inevitably sign up a lot of guys. We did a few seminars that I thought, were, again, I wish my vocabulary was bigger. It was awfully humbling to have that many guys show up in a room, taking notes, and it was neat. It's always such a good experience up there. This one was pretty extra special from years past, for sure.
That's awesome. Jordan, before we get into talking about Utah, we're going to kind of go through the ins and outs of Utah and The Draw, but your background, you're no stranger to the application game. Talk a little bit about your background and your strengths as you see them.
Sure. I think even starting sooner than later, my dad, Jay, was quite visionary at quite a young age, not only in Utah where I grew up, but starting to branch out. He started me down a path with lots of different points in lots of places. And, at 37 years old, I hit 20 points in a few different places, including Utah this last year. And I don't know why that's kind of a rite of passage, but I felt like it was. I feel like I can relate to some of these guys who've been in the game a long time, and yet I also feel like being that I am a younger generation by a little bit than some of the other guys out there, inherently I've always been behind lots of point curves. And because of that, I feel like how I go about creating opportunities with applications so that I'm not buying landowner permits and I'm not buying vouchers and things like that. I've had to be a little bit outside of that normal, just get started, apply until you draw type mentality. Like, I'm always looking for the wrinkle, and it's because I just, again, myself and many others, I wasn't old enough to be in a max point situation in really anywhere. The point systems existed before I could get in the game, and or if maybe there's one or two out there that weren't quite that same scenario, but my dad didn't jump on it like he did some of the other places. So been in it a long time, and then back in 2014 started at Cabela's Tags, got asked to come and join that team up there. And you don't know what you don't know, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it. But again, insanely humbling experience. It was like walking into a room full of giants, and then the volume that we were required to be doing at that Cabela's Tags was so much more than you could have ever imagined. I guess getting something started from nothing. And you just get baptized by fire. And I think, like anything, repetition is the key to being good at something. And I got such an amazing opportunity. And the truth is, Jay, I don't necessarily think that I'm anything, without question, I'm nothing special. I don't know why I got the opportunity to go up to Cabela's compared to so many guys that I know that are good friends with in the industry and out. But if you give most guys the chance that I did to sit there and become a student of this now for the past 5 and 6 years, let alone coming up and growing up in point systems, I think that they would anybody spends 10, 12 hours a day being a student of anything, you're going to learn a ton about it, and that's what I am. I'm constantly a student of it, and nowadays, resources that exist like GoHunt.com, anybody can become a student of it and have so much at your fingertips to learn. It's just that I don't have distractions. This is it for me. This is all I do. It's all I've done now for quite a long time, and I'm quite humbled by the opportunity for sure.
So the Draw is a company that you started with your partners, and you guys do applications for hunters across the western U.S. That's a 30,000 foot. But why don't you tell the listeners, and then we'll dive into Utah, what you guys do on a day-to-day basis at the Draw?
Sure. So I mean, at the ground level of it, we're an application service, Jay. We find that, like we said, there's so much resources out there, and they're available for guys that are looking for it, that truly our business is a customer service-oriented business. If you can't keep up with the deadlines, you don't want to keep up with the deadlines, you don't want to keep up with the research part of it, we become a good fit. We feel like we can navigate really anyone's goals. If they want to go elk hunting every year for the next 10 years, they want to go deer hunting every year for the next 10 years, and they want to do that with applications, then we can help them build what we call a hunt plan, so that we take out that randomness as much as possible, so that we're not simply grabbing a handful of darts and throwing it at the wall. We have finish lines that we're building up to quickly, so that we're hunting as often as we want. And then, hunting is such a progressive sport. We're always trying to kind of look through a crystal ball with a hunter, knowing that if you kill, half a dozen 280 to 300 inch bulls over the next, 6 or 8 years, eventually what you're excited about and what your goal is, even if it's just in that one genre, is inherently going to be different than what it is currently. And we build plans around that, and for each species, and then and execute them so that we are hunting as often as we want with these draw opportunities. And we are the only company in the country, Jay, that offers what we call a floated and a non-floated service. So depending on the customer and what they would prefer, essentially the floated becomes the states like Wyoming and New Mexico and some of the stuff in Idaho, where they require all that money up front just to get your name in the hat. Our floated service, for a fraction of the cost, takes a lot of the tying up all that money for extended periods of time, and we do a Kids Apply Free program. So if you're working with us, whether it's the floated or the non-floated version, and you want to get your youth hunter rolling as you should, we don't charge a dime for it, whether they are floated or not. So that's the core of it. Once a guy draws a tag, we're as involved as they would like us to be in helping them secure an outfitter. We work with some of the very best in the country. I'm always humbled by the willingness that so many of these guys have to take our hunters, no matter where it's at. And sometimes you don't draw, and we have lots of stuff like that, whether it's international or domestic. Again, we're as involved as guys want us to be with helping with outfitters. And I would also even call out the DIY guys, right? If you draw a tag, we've got so many networks and resources. I'm not saying we're going to be able to put an X on a map and say this is it, but pretty often we're able to at least narrow down, a bigger unit to help guys at least get pointed in the right direction, and see if we can't help as much as we can once the tag is drawn, no matter which direction they'd like to go.
Awesome, man. Let's dive into Utah. Looks like we've got a March 5th deadline. Why don't you give an overview for those people out there that maybe are new to Utah, maybe haven't applied, and then as well talk to how the structure works for those that have been applying, but might need to be the edges need to be filled in a little bit.
Sure. So, I honestly, I think I have kind of a very different take on Utah, to be honest with you, Jay, than some, and the part of that is just again, I'm kind of a product of that system. At a 10,000-foot view, Utah is another state that is a bonus point state, and what I would call a modified bonus point system. And so bonus point means raffle tickets to me, right? And then the modified portion of that means that there is a potential finish line. There is a max point pool, and 50% of the tags are set aside for a max point drawing, and then 50% are set aside for a random drawing. Starting last year, they kind of adjusted how their 50% rule was. So now, say there is 5 total non-resident tags, 3 of those go into the max point pool versus prior to 2019, it would have gone the other way. But, so at face value, all that sounds great for a draw system. 50% of the tags, whoever's been applying the longest, 50% in a random drawing. The problem for non-residents is just really boils down to the fact that overall there's very few permits. So it's not very often that we see even 5 in any one given hunt code. And if we do, we would probably want to take a harder look at that, comparing it to so much of what else is going on in the state, because often it's 1 or 2 permits for non-residents, especially in some of the more elite opportunities. Meanwhile, the once-in-a-lifetime stuff, not always, but almost always, is going to be only 1 permit. So if there is only 1, that is one nice thing, is it does for sure go into the random drawing. So where I say that I differ a little bit on how other guys look at it, Jay, is that point system is so mature that inherently it really is a raffle ticket. The idea that someone is going to get started today in Utah and they're going to pay their $10 per year for most species, particularly the once-in-a-lifetime or the hunts that are the highest, the highly coveted ones, and eventually get to a max point situation, even if it's a youth hunter, the math says they're not going to. They're never going to get to the finish line. Now, there's some wrinkles in that, particularly, a couple of antelope type of hunts and a couple of late rifle elk hunts and some odds and ends of deer. But overall, as a general rule, we're never going to get to a max point. So if we're not going to get to a max point, why would we ever start there? And my opinion is that knowing that you have a chance, particularly with the once-in-a-lifetime or the elite stuff, and because you always have a chance. There's never a time where you're going to have a 0% chance of drawing. $65 if we do it correctly every other year for a hunting license, and a $10 raffle ticket to get in, and essentially the $10 is buying us another raffle ticket the year following, and so on and so forth. If I can put it in that kind of terms, I have a lot easier time justifying the expense of it. If I'm looking at it for a finish line and when can I go, the only real solution to that in Utah is their general deer permits, which is not a bonus point system. It's a preference point system, but it makes it a lot easier to invest in that state if I know that, I put in for, we've talked before, like, me, like I'm crazy aggressive, particularly when it comes to sheep. So I put in for what's typically considered the lesser of all of the non-resident choices in Utah for a desert bighorn. And with 20 points, I'm still at about a 0.15% chance of drawing. So if a guy just getting started is at a less than 0.01% chance of drawing and I'm at a 0.15, well, to me, that's the same odds. They have the same chance as I do after 20 years of applying, and the history has shown over the last few years that typically the person who draws has less than 10 points because there's lots of them, right? There's way more guys with 10 or less points applying for this stuff than there are guys like myself with 20. And my 20 raffle tickets, when you put them with everybody else's raffle tickets, they sure don't have a lot of presence in that draw. So for $10 to not put in, how can you not? Every chance to draw some of these elite tags is one more chance to draw them, and Utah is pretty affordable. It's not hard, but it's not a state to look at as a finish line type of state. It's that there's excellent quality, fantastic hunting, and even the worst units in the state, oftentimes in the limited entry stuff, I would put head-to-head with so much else of what's going on in lots of places in the country, and that's why I invest in it, and that's why I would, talk to somebody else about investing in Utah, but not a finish line state at all.
You talk about general deer. Talk a little bit about how that program works and how their dedicated program works, and how that may be a little bit more opportunity than chasing, the Ponsagon or the Henrys or some of these limited entry deer units.
Absolutely. So the general deer, honestly, for me, this could be one of the more exciting, opportunities for mule deer right now in the country, Jay. I mean, what happened is, I would say it's probably been 6-7 years ago now. Utah took what was for all intents purposes, it was almost just quadrants of the state that you were drawing, and they broke them down into what they call micro units. It was a little more than quadrants, but it was almost that. And the micro units are essentially individual mountain ranges out all across the state of Utah, and the state finally took a step towards managing each of the different deer populations on each of those mountain ranges versus a broad, management strategy over huge areas with lots of different mountains and different herds across them. Like when I was growing up in central Utah, I mean, we might hunt opening weekend on the Pavon, but then I'd get to school on Monday morning and all my buddies would be like, oh man, we slayed them up on the Monroe. There's tons of deer on the Monroe, and we'd shift over to the Monroe. And maybe I hunted there during the evenings after school leading through the week, and then I would catch wind that there was a whole bunch of deer being killed over on the Fish Lake, and I could shift over there. And so in a 9-day hunt, I could end up hunting what nowadays is 3 different units. And I think the idea that Utah is secluding their hunters and saying, okay, this is where your hunt is going to be, is definitely saving some deer. And whether they meant for that to happen or not, it sure feels like from the outside looking in that we've had a couple of shining stars start, blossoming across the state, and they're not managing for that necessarily, but just the fact that you're not having hunters shifting and moving all over the whole map, I think is starting to save some of the deer, and you're starting to see some fantastic age class. It's still probably less than 10% of the hunters are killing that 4- and 5-year-old deer, but when I was growing up, it was even less likely. Even though you could hunt all of these different places, it was less likely to run into a deer of that age class. And now so many units are producing some of those types of bucks. And you have to be a little cognizant because the state, again, isn't managing for that. So even when you've got something that really looks like it's taking off, any given year, they could issue more opportunity tags, more tags and more opportunity. And then that age class could get whittled back down. But there's a lot more management happening per unit and per mountain in Utah than there ever has been. And it sure feels like it's having a positive effect. And then because of that, it's segregating the hunters much more than they used to be. And so you can draw 80% of these general tags with, 1 point for archery, half of them with muzzleloader with 1 point. I think some of the hardest stuff to draw in the general is there's 1 or 2 units that take about 5 or 6 points with the rifle to draw. And so really short finish line, and being a preference point state, a finish line that you can project and you can plan on. And so whether the goal is to go hunting deer as often as you can, and or maybe you're a guy that has a whole bunch of elk points in one place or the other, what an awesome opportunity to get familiar with a unit prior to burning some obscene number of points on an elk hunt, you know, a year or 2 before, and have a reason to be there with a tag in your pocket. I use those general deer points with lots of my guys specifically for that. They may not inherently be super excited about hunting 2 and 3 and 4-year-old deer, but if they know they're going to use their elk points on one tag or the other, what a great opportunity with very little investment to have a reason to be there a year or 2 prior to using those elk points and get really dialed in before, you know, it's just rare to get those opportunities to have a history in a place before we're about to use a lot of points that we're never going to get back. So you also asked about the dedicated hunter, Jay. Sorry, I kind of went off on the general stuff. So the dedicated hunters, you know, it's not for everybody. But if you want to hunt more, you want to, you know, get super familiar with an area, that program for residents, in my opinion, is a no-brainer. And for some non-residents, again, looking for lots of opportunity to be able to enroll in that program. And essentially, you know, what that means is you once you draw into the dedicated hunter program, you're guaranteed 3 deer tags for 3 years, and you're allowed to hunt the archery, the muzzleloader, and the rifle hunt during those seasons. You're only allowed to harvest 2 deer in a 3-year period, but you guarantee yourself the opportunity to go often and get really familiar with an area and have the best chance of being there when the conditions are right and capitalize on it.
So Jordan, there's general deer hunt, and then there's a dedicated deer program, dedicated deer hunt program. Explain the dedicated deer hunt program. So,
you know, it's a really unique program that Utah designed a long time ago, and I really love it, Jay. I think it's quite an interesting concept between multiple, you know, additional hunting opportunities, let alone, you know, on the back end, what these hunters, you know, are truly doing for the wildlife. And so what that program is you can apply to draw what's called a dedicated hunter permit. And by drawing that, what happens, Jay, is that you are guaranteed that you're going to have a deer tag for the next 3 years. And you're only allowed to harvest 2 deer in a 3-year period, but in exchange for only being capable of harvesting 2 deer in a 3-year period is you're guaranteed that you're going to get to go hunting, and you're also you're going to get to hunt the archery, the muzzleloader, and any legal weapon rifle hunts during each calendar year. So if you're a guy that has plenty of time and wants to get out more, you like hunting with multiple weapons, and particularly you're looking to hunt, you know, and find some of the highest age class and whatnot, you're giving yourself so much opportunity to be there when the stars align. You're going to be there when the conditions are right for one weapon or the other, and you're getting very familiar with a unit in the process of all of that. You know, and so in exchange, not only are the fees more to draw that because you've got 3 years of permits and all of that tied up into there, but these hunters are required to pass a wildlife conservation ethics course. They're required to have 32 hours of some sort of service that they give back to the Division of Wildlife for different projects over that 3-year period. So they're getting to hunt a lot more, they're giving back more, they're giving more money, there's all these different things that are happening. But if you're interested in truly hunting as much as possible and getting very familiar with the unit, like this dedicated hunter program is unlike anything else I've ever seen a state do, and it's truly set aside for the guys who aren't there just to harvest the deer, but are interested in putting all the time and effort it takes in a place to maybe find that, diamond in the rough, so to speak, in any one of these different units. So great program. I'm a huge fan of it, and if you hunt a lot and you're looking to hunt more, it's definitely an option to consider.
And with the dedicated, you can hunt archery, muzzleloader, rifle. Like, there's different options where throughout the season you can only harvest 2 deer in 3 years, but you are not limited to a certain weapon choice, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep, you can hunt all three of the different weapon categories throughout the year, each calendar year. So if you don't find, I know lots of guys that they go hit it hard and they've got a buck in mind, or a type of buck in mind that they want to hunt, and if they make it through year one without harvesting a deer, then they know for certain that they still have 2 more years of hunting in that unit with a guaranteed tag. And whether they ever kill a deer in 3 years or they kill one, just the 2 out of 3, the other nice thing about that is, we constantly talk about how many tags are being issued in each of these different states and units, and that we wish that that there wasn't as many animals being taken and harvested off of them. Well, this program is specifically designed to create more opportunity, yet inherently there is deer being saved, because you're only allowed to kill 2 out of 3. So the state is getting all of what they need, all the funding and all of that. They're getting man hours to perform projects. They're getting a lot in exchange, and more often than not, a deer is saved in the process of it, or potentially saved, I guess I should say.
What are a handful of units that are, really come on for pretty quality deer, over the last handful of years there in Utah in these general seasons?
I think that for me, the 2 that are real standout, maybe even 3, are going to be kind of in that southwest corner of the state, Jay. The Pine Valley, is definitely one of them. The Zion is also a pretty exciting unit. The Zion has a considerable amount of private land in there, so probably best to have a plan in place prior to applying for that. But there's been some fantastic deer. But then really, even the Beaver, the Beaver has such an intense elevation change. It's a rather dramatic mountain range, considering that most everything in southern Utah is very plateau-oriented type hunting. The Beaver is not, right? The Kimberleys and the Tushers up there are just these, they remind me a lot more of hunting like a western Wyoming. I mean, you've got tons of country above timberline. You've got a huge transition zone in the middle of the mountain that, a lot tougher to glass, a lot harder to hunt. And then you've got the lower elevation stuff that if you get the right conditions and those deer push into those areas, it hunts a lot the same. And because of how rugged it is, you're still seeing some pretty fantastic deer coming out of there. But really, anywhere. There's been some giant bucks killed on the Fillmore. There's been some incredible bucks killed on the Monroe. For an overall lack of deer density on the Thousand Lakes, that used to be a limited entry unit in Utah. I don't think it's what it was, right when they switched that from a limited entry to a general tag. But there is definitely still some age class there. The Boulder is such a massive unit with everything from, red rock to high plateaus, and, there's no way for there not to be age class existing in nooks and crannies of really a lot of these units, when inherently you're not having the locals bounce from one unit to the other during the course of the hunt. So you've got the major population in Utah drawing one or the other. They're probably planning it no different than most of us would plan a lot of out-of-state hunts. They come down, they hunt for 5 or 6 days, and then they go home, and that was that. But really, those locals that were bouncing from unit to unit, oddly enough, I think that is having a positive effect on those age classes, that they can't move like they used to from one place to the other. And those little nooks and crannies are allowing some of those bucks to get a little older and get some age class on them. So I wouldn't rule out any of them, to be honest with you, for producing that 5 and 6 year old deer nowadays. And when I was growing up, that was definitely not the case. But, shining stars, I would definitely say Zion, Pine Valley, Beaver are probably the 3 that I would be looking at the closest.
And when you look at limited entry deer, you obviously have the 2 shining stars of the Henrys and the Paunsaugunt. It sounds like everyone's saying that the Paunsaugunt has actually been outperforming the Henrys and has probably maybe retaken the top spot where, the Paunsaugunt used to hold that for a long time. Talk a little bit about those 2 limited entry units. Obviously, those are the cream, the cream of the crop and the best that Utah has to offer. But talk about them.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely kind of an apples to oranges situation, and it's really fun that you can actually with the 2 different deer applications, the general season deer and then the limited entry deer, Jay, is that Utah created a system with their deer that you can always swing for the fence on some elite permit and have a chance in the sequence of the drawing. They're going to look at those limited entry deer actually as the very first one that is drawn. And so you've got a chance to draw the Henrys or the Paunsaugunt. Meanwhile, you've got, a backup plan to still go hunting for deer in Utah and all the general. So when I say apples to oranges, I mean, really, like many states, Jay, the highest densities of animals are often managed for an opportunity to go hunting versus an age class. And so we look at the Paunsaugunt and the Henrys, and history says that these were actually 2 of the very worst deer populations in Utah. Each of them are one of the very few places in the last 40 years that the population was so bad that Utah decided to close them down for about 5-year periods. And the Paunsaugunt was, further back in the early 80s when that happened. And then the Henrys was, I'm going to embarrass myself, I can't remember the exact dates, but much later, right? I believe in the 90s is when they shut the Henrys down. Well, what they've done, moving forward is they allowed the few deer that were there to get the age class that's exciting for certain segments of hunters in the country, and then once they reopened them, they've continued to manage for that. I think as far as overall deer populations, the Paunsaugunt, while it might be one of the weaker deer populations in the state, there's a whole lot more deer there than there is on the Henry still to this day. And I think that's probably why, where for so long the Henrys was the absolute front runner. As time has wore on, you can only kill so many giant deer off of a place before it starts to finally having some sort of effect. Not to say that, the Henrys, you put that up against 95% of other deer units and hunts in the country, it's still way up there. It's still a top 5%, probably a top 2% deer hunt, and chance at that, 190 plus kind of deer. Meanwhile, we're not seeing near as many of those kind of bucks, and definitely not near as many or a high as percentage of the 200 plus inch deer coming off of there in recent years as we are now down on the Paunsaugunt. Now, mind you, there's more tags on the Paunsaugunt, and there's more deer, and it just makes sense that eventually, that jump rope has swung enough times that the Paunsaugunt with some, and I think it's not even just a management strategy. I think all of the work that those locals and the division has done combating what was probably the more lethal thing happening on the Paunsaugunt, which was vehicle collisions with deer as they were moving out of the Paunsaugunt and moving down into Arizona for the winter range. There's there's a perfect storm of events that has been happening the last 10 years on the Paunsaugunt that's led up to where, if you were to ask me personal opinion, I would take the Paunsaugunt tag over the Henrys probably so quick it would make your head spin right now. There is just some fantastic stuff happening down there. That being said, like many of our best units, there's still a whole lot of guys that are going home with 160 to 170 class deer, right? Maybe even 150 to 170 class. And I think that's one important thing to point out is even when you draw some of these, the stuff that's the hardest to draw, that doesn't mean that there's a giant deer around every corner. It's the same with elk. It's the same with anything. It's more often than not, honestly, Jay, I think that those hunts are a little underwhelming for the guys who've been waiting so long to finally get to go. As far as just deer density, age class, it's not what they've dreamed or been told it to be. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means you need to be really prepared. You need to, like you stress all the time, you either need to invest in it with time or with money, one or the other, to truly take full advantage of how special those rare occasions are that we have tags like that in our pocket.
For sure. Jordan, before we get into elk and some of the other animals in Utah, I want to take a quick second here and thank the sponsors of the podcast. You had mentioned GoHunt.com, the Insider. You had mentioned the draw odds and the valuable tool that you see that as. If you guys are not a GoHunt Insider member, you can go to GoHunt.com/JScott. You're going to get a $50 GoHunt Gear Shop gift card just for signing up. It's the best Western hunting resource tool out there as far as draw odds. Go check them out. I also want to thank GoHunt. My friend Cody Nelson, 20-plus years. I was actually in Cody's wedding. We've known each other a long time. He is the optics manager over there at GoHunt.com. You've heard Cody on the podcast. Cody every day wakes up and helps people find the right optics for them. If you have any glassing questions, any optics questions, if you're looking to buy any optics at all, whether it be rifle scopes, spotting scopes, binoculars, tripods, whatever it might be in regards to optics, give Cody a call, 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can also shoot him a text on his cell phone at 602-399-3699. I really appreciate the work that Cody's done. I want to congratulate them. Just in 2 years of business there, he's been in the optics business a long time, but 2 years at GoHunt, they got Swarovski Optic Dealer of the Year, and that's a huge testimony to the work that Cody does. Give Cody a call. I also want to thank Kuiu Ultralight Hunting. That's the gear that I wear on all my hunts. You can go to kuiu.com. That's KUIU.com to find out more information. I also do a Q&A on my Instagram and answer a lot of Kuiu questions. I appreciate Kuiu's support. Phonescope.com. Use the JScott20 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount. And then onxmaps.com, use the JScott20 promo code, and that's going to get you a 20% discount there at onxmaps.com. Guys, are you still there, Jordan?
Yep, I'm here. Yep.
Okay. I wanted to dive into elk. And, Utah offers general elk seasons, and then they also have the limited entry elk season. And I get a lot of questions about that general elk season, and I just wanted to get your take on it briefly, and then I want to dive into the limited entry and then talk about some of the different other animals that opportunity to hunt in Utah.
Sure. Perfect. So the general elk, the any bull units, I love that it's available, Jay, but I guess it really goes against the grain for me often, not everywhere, but often, as far as, like we talked about a minute ago, that it's a very common practice for a state to manage the best populations that they have for an opportunity to go hunting. Meanwhile, the weaker populations they're managing for the age class. And Utah kind of has a real twist to that whole train of thought, and where they're giving the opportunity on the highest population in the state, they're doing that with spike, elk, and cow hunting. And then they're also managing those units now. That used to not be the case, where every unit was also a spike unit, but now, for the most part, or I think entirely, the places that they're trying to grow the biggest bulls also have opportunity hunting with the spike and the cows. And so then some of our weakest populations in the state, they're just more or less throwing their hands in the air and saying, well, there's very few animals out there. There's probably always going to be very few animals out there, so we might as well let hunters that want to go and give it a whirl shoot or harvest or have a chance to harvest whatever they find when they get there, whether it's a spike or a big bull, and those can be really frustrating units. I think the one asterisk to my kind of train of thought there really lies within like the South Slope, Bonanza, anything up in that northeast corner, Chalk Creek, Camas, North Slope. I mean, there is a lot of elk in those forests, right? But I also believe that part of why they're doing that is that there is a large amount of private land in that part of the state as well. So great elk herd, but access is always going to be difficult between the reservation and just the massive amount of private property that exists. There's still plenty of room to hunt, especially as we get into the deeper, darker places of the Uinta Mountains and things like that. But overall, outside of that being kind of the anomaly to the rest of the state, when we look at what we can hunt for the any bull, just be aware, like we're talking extremely low density of animals in most of these units in most places. So if you find a nice little pocket of elk that you can hunt regularly, and I know guys who do, and they're very successful at it, but for a guy just planning a trip to Utah and that's kind of his starting point, I mean, at a minimum, do some serious amount of research and be prepared to spend quite a bit of time in the unit to be successful, because they're not managing them for really anything other than just an opportunity to go hunting, and there's not a whole lot of exciting stuff year over year coming out of much of those any bull units.
And then let's dive into the limited entry bull elk units.
Sure. So limited entry is definitely kind of again 180 degrees back from what these any bull options are, and so there is quite a number of different limited entry units across the state, from the very far northern reaches to the southern, and all scattered through there. Highest densities of elk right now in Utah are really the two units, the Wasatch Mountains and the Central Manti Mountains. And so those two places in particularly are issuing more tags, Jay. And if a guy is looking to get started in Utah and is looking for a finish line, particularly on the late rifle elk hunts that happen in both the Central Mountain Manti and the Wasatch Mountains, are going to be the most viable options to be looking at. And, they're actually, again, comparing those, while they might be kind of the lower tier and more available type of hunting in Utah, I would put those units and those elk hunts up against, 99% of what's happening in Colorado. I would put them up against a lot of what's happening in New Mexico and Idaho and Wyoming, as far as that although bull for bull is maybe not going to be as exciting as some places in Utah, you're still in Utah. They still have a great management strategy around their elk, and the chance of you're hunting a unit that's still consistently producing a few of those 360 plus kind of bulls a year is absolutely true. Once we move out past that, there is a few other kind of anomalies that don't have the history of producing giant bulls, but any unit in Utah has a chance to produce a 340 to 360 class bull. Lots of them are killing 280 to 300 inch bulls across the state. And, you know, if you're looking for that shining star, if you're looking for the very best of what Utah has to offer, you know, for a long time, almost kind of like Ponce got to Henry's with the deer, you know, the San Juan and the Pavant and the Boulder, all three of those have been kind of where guys have been looking for, you know, what is the most consistent for these anomaly type bulls, that 380 plus kind of bull. And the San Juan has kind of been the winner for a long time. You know, personal opinion, the Boulder right now is probably the shining star. I think that the last few years, the age class that's been coming out of there is definitely been more consistent than what's happening on the San Juan. But truthfully, Jay, regardless of season dates, regardless of you know, one unit to the next, any one of those still have a chance to produce something quite special. You know, the Southwest Desert, the West Desert Deep Creek, the Fillmore, the Boulder, the San Juan, the LaSalle's, the Book Cliffs, all of them have fantastic track records of that 340 to 360 class bull. And, you know, outside of like one or two places on Earth, you know, if you see a bull like that opening morning, you probably better get pretty serious unless you got a stack of them in your garage so big you can't run and jump over it. Like, that's what you're there to hunt. That's what you're there to kill. So there's always anomalies, but to bank on it being you in a 5-day period or a 6-day period is super unlikely. So you got to look at the realistic track records and what that medium kind of bull is, and then just, you know, make up your own mind when you see, you know, those kind of bulls, whether that's what you're after or if you want to wait it out for that anomaly to happen or that lightning strike to happen. But if it's going to, it's as likely to happen on the San Juan, the Boulder, the Fillmore as it is any of the other units in the state.
Jordan, we've got once-in-a-lifetime animals in Utah with the Desert Bighorn, the Rocky Mountain Bighorn, and the goat hunts. And there's some other animals to hunt. Talk briefly, obviously the buffalo as well, and I guess bull moose. I'm forgetting the bull moose, but talk about those once-in-a-lifetime hunts briefly, and then we'll conclude. And I appreciate all your time, but let's talk about these once-in-a-lifetime hunts.
Yep, absolutely. You know, so you know, Utah, again, kind of going back to how their draw process works, Jay, is being that more often than not, there's only going to be one non-resident permit available. You know, it's not a matter of applying with the idea that we're ever going to hit a finish line, especially for us non-residents. It's about the fact that for $10 we've got our name into another hat, and with one raffle ticket in the bucket, we, you know, when we shake down the math, we really have as much presence, or all, you know, within a fraction of as much presence as a guy who's been at it like myself for 20 years. And so if you're going to invest in that hunting license for $65 for an extra 10 per species to not throw your name in those hats, outside of you just don't have time for it, or there just truly is zero interest in hunting one of those species or the other, it's too bad, because some of this stuff is getting so expensive. For $10 to not have your name in that hat and maybe be the lucky one is unfortunate. You know, if it's, you know, as far as just like if we're truly doing it and we know inherently that our odds are quite low no matter which direction we go, then, you know, when we look at the sheep, right, for the Rockies, I think, you know, a 9-mile tag is definitely the one I'm going to key up on. If I'm chasing odds, I'm probably going to look at the Newfoundland Mountains for those California Bighorns. For deserts, if I'm looking for the very best the state has to offer, then I'm going to be keyed up on the Zion. It makes sense. It's, you know, it's the closest unit to some of the sheep that are in Nevada and the age class and the genetics that are coming out of there. So the Zion is definitely the top choice for the deserts. Meanwhile, if we're chasing very minute changes in odds, but if we are chasing them, the San Rafael unit is definitely the easier of all the tags to draw for the non-residents. But we're, making that clear. I mean, we're literally talking less than 0.1% of a point, in percentage-wise when we say we're best unit in the state versus chasing the odds. So not a much shift. The Buffalo right now in Utah is pretty exciting. There's been, the fact that they've split that now, and you've got between what used to just be the Antelope Island and the Henrys and the few hunts that were there. Now we have the Book Cliffs in the middle of it. Now they're adding archery specific permits. I get, there's all sorts of different twists and turns happening with the bison that is segregating those guys who have chosen to apply for that. And the age class is fantastic. They're killing as big of bulls as they've ever killed in Utah in both the book, really anywhere that they have a hunt. It's just very tough to draw. So if you're looking for a super low physicality hunt, as low as it can be, it's a more expensive permit. It's about a little over $1,000 more, but that Antelope Island tag is, it's a great way to check the box on a bison. If you're into a hardcore hunt, and you want to go do some, Wild West stuff, the Henry Mountains or even the roadless Book Cliffs and any of the Book Cliffs, maybe not quite outside the roadless, but overall, any of them are going to be a fun, challenging hunt. The moose right now, the Ogden, the Wasatch, the South Cache, throw a dart. Like, if you land in a moose tag in any one of those, I'd probably say the Wasatch is the more consistent of the areas, but really any of those units are going to produce a fantastic bull if you give it the amount, the right amount of time, or you invest in an outfitter that's going to give it the right amount of time and things like that. They're all really good. Mountain goats, again, Utah has been kind of pushing goats into every nook and cranny they can, like they have their sheep, and they're trying to expand opportunities by introducing herds in all sorts of places. And the age class is there. There's fantastic goats coming out of every unit in the state. If you're looking for a lower physicality hunt, the Willard Peak is something to consider. You're going to drive your truck up to the parking lot that's clear at the top of the mountain. I think it's just over 12,000 feet, and there's an 18-inch, mountain bike, dirt bike trail that goes all the way across the rim of that unit, and you're even going to see goats right in that parking lot. So low physicality, look at the lower physicality. As soon as you come off that trail, it's still every bit as physical as any goat hunt I've ever been on. But, between those two, the Beaver and the Willard, either one of those are a potential for a Boone and Crockett type goat. And then you've got the Nebo, you've got the Uintas, you've got lots of options. So don't look at it as a finish line. Don't look at it like I'm trying to build up towards something here. It's not that, unfortunately, in Utah. If you have less than 10 points, hell, if you probably have less than 15 points in that state for all of those once-in-a-lifetimes, the idea that we're ever going to get to a finish line there is so unlikely. But for $10, throw your name in the hat. Guys draw. They have tags. And it's fantastic hunting when it finally does happen.
Jordan, that's an awful lot of information. I really appreciate the amount of time that you spend and the thoroughness, that's probably not even a word, the amount of thorough explanation that you have. I want to encourage the listeners to reach out to you, but I also want to give you a chance to have a final word on talking to the people out there that are listening, and let them know how they can reach out to you.
I appreciate it, Jay, very much. Probably our biggest one, like so many nowadays, if you happen to be on social media, our handle on Instagram is @WeAreTheDraw. Facebook, you can look us up at the Facebook /The Draw, and We're on LinkedIn. We've got a little YouTube channel, but primarily, the biggest thing I'd say to your listeners, if you want to keep up with what we're doing and what's going on, the social media is great. But if you have a specific question, phone calls are free, Jay. Like, I think that, again, the information that so many places is providing now, it's so fantastic and it's so great. And I think guys should seriously consider that, like the research part of it, to jump on GoHunt.com. You can't beat how deep and thorough the information there is on the Insider. But if you have a one-off question, direct message us on social media or give us a call. I mean, we can usually dial it in super quick, from on the ground experience, let alone just going over some basic odds and get a clearer picture of what it is that you're thinking about investing in, and we like those phone calls. So anybody has a question, please give us a call and we can get you dialed in, and the phone call is always free, so why not?
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it as always. It was great seeing you at the show, and you guys, you've been creating a name in the industry, and the growth has been great, and you can just see the treatment that you give your customers, and I just commend you on that, and I look forward to having you guys on again. We're going to talk New Mexico. We're going to go in depth with New Mexico, and just appreciate this talk about Utah, and I'll be chatting at you down the road here.
I can't wait. I sure appreciate it, Jay.
All right, buddy. God bless. Take care.
Bye-bye.